Hello, everyone. My name is Amina, and a very warm welcome to Workshop Wednesdays with Mentor Me Collectiev. As we dive into October, we are embracing the theme of prescription for disruption, optimizing life with tech. We're exploring how we're exploring how technology can act as a prescription for a better, more efficient, and healthier life. So, for those of you who are new to Mentor Me Collectiev, we are a community dedicated to empowering individuals, especially first gen techies, um, with the knowledge, skills, and tools that they need to succeed in their tech careers, while also highlighting the positive impact of technology and what it can do and what impact it can have on our lives and communities. So today we're getting hands-on with a project that perfectly embodies our theme, code and hydrate. Build a water intake tracker app, Android edition. And now I'm gonna introduce our exceptional speaker. Her name is Vanessa Johnson. So Vanessa is a brilliant senior Android developer and tech wellness advocate known for intuitive, high performance mobile apps. With years of experience creating successful utility and lifestyle applications, she deeply understands how to design a user experience that genuinely drives positive behavior change. So, Vanessa, just a minute. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm gonna bring her on stage now. Just a minute. Okay. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi. Glad to
Okay.
be.
Yes, thank you. So we're gonna hear from her. But before we start, quick question. So if code and hydrate was a single line of code, what would you comment above it to read and explain its purpose and impact on the user's day?
Good question. Um, I would say it's a great way to keep track of how much water you drink in a day. So, we have the standard that we should drink 8 glasses of water, 8 cups of water. And sometimes if you're busy throughout the day, you may forget or just don't meet that quota. But this is a nice kind of reminder and tracker to be like, okay, I hit my mark of how much water I'm drinking for today or throughout the week.
Okay, so we're gonna throw it out to the audience. The question is, if um, if code and hydrate was a single line of code, what single line of what comment would you put above it to explain its purpose? But also, I'm sorry, that was for Vanessa. For everyone, this is the question. So, what do you think is important to track when you're building a wellness app? Is it things like, say, water? Is it sleep? What do you think is important to track? So we have mental health, we have body metrics. Okay. Um, Someone says maybe sleep. I track my sleep because I don't know how much sleep I get. So I usually just, prefer to do that. BMI. I think that's also important because a lot of people are into, we go to the gym and we try to get healthy, and we sort of want to know how much if we're overweight or if we're underweight, that sort of thing. Okay. All right then. So moving on, um, I'm gonna let Vanessa start with what she's here to do today, which is to teach us about how to build that app. And Vanessa, you can take it away.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna walk through like an overview of how to build a water intake tracker. Before we dive in, a little bit about me is that I'm an Android engineer at the New York Times. I work on the games app. So have you ever heard of like Wordle, Connections, maybe even Pips, which is one of our newer games that came out a few months ago? That's the app that I work on. So we can get started. So just like a little agenda or like flow for today, we're going to talk about like how to get your Android Studio set up, because that's the environment that we use to program our Android apps or an Android app. Why build a water tracker, some project requirements of like what do we need to account for when we're building this, project structure, Android UI and logic. So we're gonna look at some Kotlin, which is the language we use to write Android. You can also use Java, but Kotlin's the more modern way to do it. We're gonna touch upon the Android lifecycle, data persistence, where we are saving certain data locally. So whenever you close your app or open it back up, like whatever data you had in the previous session is saved for future sessions, and it can be adjusted or added to depending on like your use case. Then we're going to go through some testing and troubleshooting. So you would always need some debugging when you're coding your app, because there's never going to be a time where you code your app in one go and it's like perfect. And then some like suggestions of how you can expand your app later on. So for Android Studio setup, you can usually just like go into Google and say like Android Studio. It'll bring you to the developer website and you can download it. Just make sure you download the correct one for your computer. So for Windows, there's a Windows version, and for Mac, there's two different versions where you have your Intel or you have the Silicon one, which is more for like M2 or M1 app computers. You have to install some like SD components. Usually, depending on some setups, it might you won't run into that many issues, and you should be able to just run it. And if you run into any issues, you can always like look them up. Stack Overflow is also a good resource. Maybe an AI, you can like look up like why is this giving me an error. But some common issues that you could run into are having like the wrong Java version. So these are like some steps that you can take to set that up. And then depending on like the type of computer you have, you can have some low memory depending on what you have running. And then your emulator, which is kind of like the fake phone that is built into Android Studio, could be slow. So sometimes that can be annoying when you are trying to make a bunch of changes. Okay, so why build a water tracker? So a lot of us may be dehydrated. I sure don't get my 8 cups of water or glasses of water a day. Try to be better at that. So this app can help you improve these habits where you'd be tracking the water and say like, okay, today I've only had 2 cups versus the 8 that I'm supposed to have. There is a big digital health market where there are a lot of companies coming about, startups and stuff like that, that are using maybe like AI or other like wearables to help with your health. And this can be another app that you use to track your water intake. So demonstrate like Android skills. So you'd be able to work with the language and just different technologies of storing the data and being able to display the information on the UI or like your user interface, which is also just like the screen that you see when you're in an app. It promotes accountability. So you're, making sure that you are getting the necessary water intake. And then it kind of solves a world problem where someone can use it and, make sure that they are getting the necessary amount. Okay, so what do we need to account for? So we have our hydration goal. So for right now, we're going to be using like 2000 ml. You can always like tweak it to have like a different unit of like fluid ounces or cups. But for right now, for this example, we're going to use milliliters. We're going to have to take in some user input because they can put in a specific amount of milliliters, or there's are going to be some buttons where you can just click on and it'll automatically add the increment or the value. We have daily tracking, so we have like a visual look of a progress bar that will increase when you are adding the amount that you are tracking. And then obviously data persistence, where we're saving the history between sessions. So we are saving it per date, so you can track how much water you have today, come log back in or open up your app tomorrow, log whatever water you drank that day, but you can also look back at your history and see how much water you drank before. So key considerations for our app is a simple interface for quick water logging. For right now, this example is going to be 2 screens. For a more fleshed out app, you might have multiple screens and might be more informational. But for this like short workshop, we're going to have the 2 screens. We have a clear visual progress indicators, and we're going to have our local data storage. Okay, so assuming you have like Android Studio already on your computer, you just create a new project. So you do file, new project. You're going to name it water intake tracker, for example, or if you want to name it something else, that's also fine. But make sure that since we're using XML, you're going to be selecting empty views activity. If you do a regular empty activity, it will automatically show up in Compose. So Compose is just another way that you can demonstrate or build out your UI, which I think more companies are probably shifting towards. But we are, for this workshop, going to be looking at XML. So some key project files. I will note that, so we are going to look at some code during this workshop, but there is going to be a link at the end that has all the code wrapped up on GitHub, where it's like the whole project. So you can download it, run it, and then, look back at what we've talked about today and look at these files. So we're going to have our main activity and our activity main XML. So those 2 files are automatically in the like a Android project when you make one, and also the Android manifest. So the manifest is just letting the project know like what screens or activities are in the app. An activity you can just think of for this workshop is just the screen that you're on. And then we also have our history screen to say that we can look back at our previous history, our activity history XML, which similar to our other XMLs is going to be like the layout of how the screen looks. And then our water intake storage is another file that is going to take control of like our data. It's like our data manager in a way. So here is like a file hierarchy of how it will be set up and how it's going to look when you download, or if you download the project off of GitHub. We have our activities and our regular Kotlin files in our like Kotlin and Java folder. And then in our resource file, which is this res for short, we have our layout file that takes or holds the files that are responsible for showing the UI or like the screen itself. So that's like just pointing out which files we are going to be talking about today. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Compose and we talked about XML, but what exactly is XML? So it's a markup language. It's a way of creating our user interfaces in Android. So you can kind of think of it as a blueprint for our app's visual components. So in this little code snippet, we have these tags. So we have linear layout is just like how the elements on the screen are going to be shown. So here we have like our orientation is going to be vertical. So everything on our screen is going to be in a vertical like organization. And our text view is just showing like some text on the screen. So maybe like a title or just some information that is given to the user. But do notice that there's this ID here that is going to be identifiable to this exact text view. We're going to touch a little bit more on that later on, but that's going to be an important factor when we are looking at the code. Okay, so just a little kind of like crash course on XML tags that are like more common. So we have our linear layout, like we saw in the previous slide, that organizes or arranges our elements in a single line. So it could be horizontal or vertical, depending on what orientation you choose. We have our scroll view, which just makes your screen scrollable. So sometimes you may have a screen that has a lot of information on it that may not be able to show all at once. So you'd be able to scroll and be able to see like what's like potentially off the screen, or you can have it like horizontal too. But usually for, or at least for this app, you could have it as a vertical scroll. Text view, like I said, is just displaying some text, like kind of like you've ever heard of when people say, oh, make a hello world application. So you have your text called hello world. And then there's like a design tip that these elements can be nested inside of each other. So you would put like a text view in a linear layout or in a scroll view. And then the smaller components would be put in those larger ones. And they kind of they give like the page like more orientation or a better layout. And then a few more that we're going to be looking at is a button, which is clickable. So, we have a button we're going to give it some functionality. And then an edit text where we're going to be typing in some information. So for our workshop, we're going to be looking at typing in how much like milliliters we are tracking. And then we're not going to be looking at any images for this project, but you can also add images if you want to. You just have to make sure that you add the image to your project and reference it correctly. So that would be in like your drawable folder that you will also find in like the resource folder. Okay, so this is just going to be how our intake tracker is going to look. When you download the project, you can obviously like change the colors, change the layout, just get like more of a feel of where everything is and how things work. But this is how it's going to look when you download it, or after we go through this workshop. Okay, so some key UI components. We have our edit text. So we have an ID where it's going to be attributable or identifiable with custom input. And we have like our layout width, our height, and our input type. So we're letting the project know, or the compiler know that, hey, this text view or this text like box will take in a number. And we have a little hint to say like, okay, this will be a custom ML. We're going to have a button so we can add whatever ML we are tracking. And we also have the default ones that we had before, where we can add like 250 or 300. So you can use those as like a quick add. But if you want to specify what different value, you type it in and then use the button as an addition. We have our progress bar, where at the top it's going to show our progress out of the 2000, or depending on if you have a different value there. And then just from XML basics, so kind of like reiterating some of the slides that we talked about before. So we have our edit text, our button, our progress bar, our text view, our container that holds all of those small components is our linear layout. And then IDs are required to reference in Kotlin code. So notice that when I pointed out the IDs of like custom input or custom button, you're going to be referencing those in your code or in your like Kotlin file. And then some quick tips for like padding, which adds like design or spacing of the screen. You can add 16 dp, which is how we measure like how much space can be top, bottom, or left or right. We can set width, which matching a parent. So whatever components you're applying a match parent to, it will match the the width of the component that's inside. So say, for example, we added a edit text inside a linear layout. If we added a match parent to an edit text, it will match the width of the layout, the linear layout itself. Okay, so some app architecture. So like I said, we have our main activity, which is kind of given to you when you do make a project. It's going to be your app's entry point. And the activity main XML is the UI layout definition of the main activity file. So those two are connected. And when we are going on the activity, there's something called an onCreate, which sets up our UI and initializes any variables. So we are going to talk about an Android lifecycle of how things are set up, what needs to be initialized or made in a certain place to make sure that everything runs correctly. And then for our XML, we have our text view that displays the text, our button that adds water or adds like the amount of water, our edit text that takes in the user inputs, and then the progress bar is our goal tracking. So we also have another screen for our history. So that's reachable from our main activity with like a button click. And then that also has an onCreate that sets up the UI and initialize variables. That's connected to the activity history XML that is the UI layout of the history activity screen. And it has these three components of our text, our list view that displays the previous progresses or the previous like tracking of other days. And then we have a back button to go back to the main page. Okay, so like I said, Android lifecycle, we have our onCreate, which is called when the activity is created. So you'd probably want to do whatever work inside of that function that needs to be done before you actually see the screen. On start is where the screen becomes visible. And then on resume is when you navigate away from that screen and come back to it. It's kind of like you are saying, hey, I'm back to the screen, and whatever's in that function will run again. So this is a more in-depth version of the Android lifecycle. You can find this on the Android developers website. We're not going to go too much into this because there are like different paths of going to onCreate, on start, on destroy, where like the activities like shut down. That's usually when you close your app. But if you do want to dive more into that, you can look into that. I'm not sure. I think you guys probably have access to the slide deck. I'm not entirely sure, but if you do, then this is also a good place to look at it again. Okay, so like I said, we looked at in XML, we have our ID that identifies what component we're talking about. So we have an add button. And then in Kotlin, we can use a find view by ID, and we take or use the ID that is assigned to that component in XML. So now we're referencing it in our Kotlin file, so we can do whatever we need to do for it. So if we want to make it visible, invisible, or change maybe its value, we can do that in our Kotlin file. Okay, so now we're going to go more into the app logic, where we will have some variables that we have to initialize. And so just a little deep dive is like late init var is just letting the compiler know that, hey, I'm making this variable, but I'm going to set a value to it later on. So you're kind of promising, hey, even though I'm not giving it a value here, it will have a value when it's going to be used. So these are all the values or variables that we're going to be looking at in our main activity, which is our main screen. Okay, so now we're initializing these variables. We are finding the elements by using the find view by ID, and we are taking whatever ID for each component and setting it equal to the variables that we said we were going to initialize before. So we have our goal text, the two buttons that we're adding a specific amount without having to type in the bar. And then we have our add button, custom input, and then the history button to go to navigate to the history page. So this is a way of connecting your variables to UI elements from your XML layout. Okay, so now we know we have a button that we're going to be adding the value to a counter. So we have to set an on-click listener, which it means that we are going to give this button some functionality. So when we do give the button functionality, we're going to take the amount that is inside of the like edit text or the input that the user put in. We're going to convert it to an integer, and then we're going to add the water to the previous amount that we have stored. Okay, so add water is a function that you have to write, and that's also on the slide. So for add water, you take in some value, and we're going to add that water to the already existing amount that we have for the current day. And then if you end up reaching your goal, you get a little toast or a little like pop-up message that says you reached your goal for today. And then here, just like if it's on the screen for a long time or a short amount of time, you can specify how long you want it to be shown for. And so now I know we see there's storage. Like, what exactly is storage? So storage is referencing the file one of the files that we saw like toward the beginning, where we have our water intake, which I said that is kind of like our data manager. So that's just saying that, hey, we're talking to our data manager saying, okay, I want you to add this amount of ML to the amount that I have already stored and update my screen so I can see the correct value. And then there are a few functions like within this file that you will obviously see when you download the project, but just to give a little overview of what they look like, you can see all the entries that you've stored. So if you store today, tomorrow, like last week, you'll see all those entries. You can load all of those like records, and that will be displayed on your history screen. You can save. So depending on the date, you can think of it as the date is a key and the value is the amount of water that's tracked for that day. And then today's string is just getting like the string of the current date. Yeah. So, and then another important thing is like the prefs, which can be short for preferences. We're going to be using water prefs as the identifier to say, hey, I want whatever information I've stored in this place, grab that for me, and then I can do whatever I want with it, with loading, saving more information to it, and things like that. Okay, so now we know that we're going to be adding to our shared preferences, which is our way of storing local data. And for shared preferences, you usually want to store small amounts of data. So right now, like say if you were going to be using this app every day for like a year or maybe further than that, you may not want to use shared preferences. You might want to use something like Room, which is more of like a database of, I don't know if anyone's heard of like SQL, but it's more of a structured database where it can hold more information. These is for more smaller pieces, but I think it's a good starting point of like getting more into saving local data. So we have our function where we're adding the amount of water, and we are loading the map, which is the function we talked about in the previous slide. And we're storing it based on the date with the updated amount of water. So if I like said I'm gonna drink 250 milliliters today, when I add it, it will look up today's date, add the amount to whatever it was before, and save that. So the core functionality is like you're getting the user input, which is the amount of water. We're going to update the intake, and we're going to update the UI, and then we save the progress. Excuse me. Okay, so I know we showed save map before, so just showing it in code a little bit where we're putting the date which was the today string. And we're going to also put in the amount of water, and you put that object into the array, and that is put into the preferences. So this is just a way of storing or saving the information that you tracked for that day. Okay, so share preferences, like we talked about before, is kind of like a key value. So if anyone's ever maybe heard of dictionaries, or can think of like a real dictionary where the key is the word and the value is like the definition, where we have our daily goal, which is 2000. That can change. You can also hard code it depending on if you know it will never change. But since it could be more of a variable value, you should probably have it stored in the share preferences. And then your water intake will always change depending on what you have for that day, and can be updated depending on if you click the button or like input some information. But like I said, we'll use it for small amounts of data like settings, goals, or user preferences. And it's kind of like a simple API to save and retrieve data that persists across sessions. So if you close out your app, like, when you swipe up and come back to it the next day, then you'll have like your history and saying, okay, I logged this water yesterday and I have the same information, saved information. And the only time that it will like be erased is when you like uninstall the app or wipe the app information. And then just like a little more honing in on like the basic usage for saving data, where we are putting the string of the information that we put together. So we put the two pieces of information of the date and the water into an object for the array. We convert that to a string and we apply that to the preferences to save it. And in order to load it, we just say get the string based on this identifier. So the key entries, you can think of it as just a variable of a string, and then whatever, say get this, go to this place. This is the identifier, and give me the information that's stored there. Okay. So data flow and best practices. So user adds water, save to shared preferences, and we update the UI display. Some key concepts were simple key value storage, persistence between app restarts, supports basic data types, and like we use it when for small data storage, app settings. We wouldn't really use it for large data sets, or like say if you're storing an image, that this probably won't be the best case, but it is good for small pieces of data depending on your use case. So here is just a little GIF of how the functionality works, where we can add the 2ML, we add the button, and then we can click view history to see our past tracking or like records. So of course we have to have some like testing and troubleshooting. So you might need to have like some input validation of like, okay, what happens if someone puts in a negative value or a value that's larger than your goal? And we want to verify our UI updates. So to make sure that our progress bar updates correctly, being able to close and reopen. So this is all about like testing. So you test the code that you write and close out the app, come back to it. Hey, is this the amount of water tracked that should be here? Or is it less or more? And then finding out if that is the case, what is the issue? And also make sure to test on different screen sizes, because, if you are releasing an app to an app store, everyone or a lot of people have different screen sizes, where you may have like an iPhone 17 or sorry, not Samsung or a Pixel 9 or someone that has like a Pixel 4. Like the screen sizes are going to be drastically different because the Pixel 4 is a lot smaller. And we can also think about troubleshooting of like null pointer exception. So that means that you are trying to use a variable or some information that has not been initialized yet. So when we looked at like the delete init var, or the variables that we said we're going to initialize, and then we initialized it by finding the ID off of the XML file, that's initializing it there. But if it is not initialized and you try to use it, your app will crash and it'll give you this error. And then same thing with like, my UI might not be responding or might not be updating correctly. Why is that? Okay, so for anyone that's heard of like GitHub, whenever you're using an app and you're working with multiple people or like just like working in a company, you're gonna have to have your code in like a localized place. So GitHub is a way for you to push up your code or have a project on there, and you can push up changes or pull down changes. But when you are pushing up changes, you might want to have your own branch so you don't affect like the overall project. So you can always git checkout -b by making a new branch, and you can add your current work and commit the progress. So you would want to have like a message that's indicative or descriptive of what you changes you made, and you push that up. And then depending on if someone's made changes to the branch, someone else made changes to the branch and push it up, you can also pull it down and see and test out what they've made. So a debugging toolkit. So when you do have Android Studio downloaded, you can add breakpoints. Breakpoints are just are telling the computer, hey, when you get past over this line, I want you to stop. And then you can see what values of variables are at that point, or what happens, or just trying to debug of like, why does it crash here? I'm trying to see like, okay, I need to hone in on this spot. Why is this a problem? And then for quick fixes, we all love is like whenever you are having a problem with Android Studio, you can always restart it. Invalidating caches is a popular one where you can go to File in your Android Studio and invalidate caches. A lot of times, if you can't figure out what's happening, that's probably like your first step. And if that fixes the problem, then it's great. But sometimes it doesn't work, so you have to figure out, okay, this is not going to work. You can also clean your project. I personally don't do that one quite often. Invalidate caches is more my go-to, but it is an option if you do want to do that. And then another thing you can do for debugging is something called logcat. So you can add logs like within your project to see what prints and what doesn't print. And if something doesn't print, then you'd be like, okay, this code is not reachable, and you have to figure out why it's not reachable. So you can filter by tags by saying like, okay, the log should be this, and you can go into logcat and search up that information, and you can check for warnings that can say like, okay, this may be an issue later on, so you should hone in on it and fix it now. For expanding your app, since we did only talk about just logging it and seeing what history we've previously had, you can implement push notifications, which is like smart reminders of, hey, remember to drink your water today. I don't know if anyone's having an app like that where it's like reminding you to do something. You can add charts to visualize like your intake to see if there's like a bar, an increasing bar or decreasing bar, kind of like know more of a trend if you are a chart person. And you can probably implement social challenges where you can compete with friends to say on a daily water intake goals. That's if you want to do that. I'm not sure if many people want to compete of how much water they intake, but it can work for different avenues or different tracking of maybe, I don't know, maybe it's recycling to say like who recycled more. This really depends on what kind of environment or like experience you want to have. But just make sure that you are documenting the process. Depending on what project you make, it can also be a great portfolio piece for upcoming interviews or recruiters. So you can demonstrate like your Kotlin knowledge, your XML knowledge, and then if you want to dive into Compose, which, like I said, is a more modern way to do your UI. Like companies are still using XML, but you can do both. It's helpful or good to know both. But like I said, yeah, you can go into each of them. And then yeah, so if you go to this link, it is the whole project itself. So you can go back and try it out, see how things work. And you can go back to this video and it will pinpoint like some files or code that we like made more time on or had more details on. And just like a little summary of like our UI design was with XML, our logic was in Kotlin, and then we saved our data, like our data persistence, using shared preferences. But that's all for today. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions. Oh, I do see one question. So you can do something similar with Swift. You can. It's I don't remember the name of the like library that you'd use to save persistent data in Swift. But for Swift, you can use like Swift UI, which is similar to Compose. For XML, I think I don't remember the name. I don't want to say it wrong, but there is something similar to it in Swift for XML.
Okay. Vanessa, thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's very important, what you're doing, and it's important to know that apps like this are very important to, uh, people's lifestyle in general. Um, so that brings me to a particular question from one of the people on here. So the person's asked that how does this track, um, how does this work, or how important is this? Um, how important is accessibility when you're developing apps like this?
Good question. So it's actually very important. So for example, with someone that has like visual impairment, um, depending on how you like make your app or code up your app, the color contrast of the text and the background make a huge difference to make something easier to read. Or if someone cannot see the screen at all, there are tools, assisted tools, like say for Android called Talkback, where you can give the UI more information to say, hey, whenever you're focused on this component using this technology, it will say this to the person. Like it conveys what's on the screen so they know where they are on the app, how to transverse or navigate the app, which is important for like obviously for business because you are targeting a larger user base, but it's also like morally important to like make sure that everyone that can use your app or wants to use your app can use your app and it's catered to in a way.
Okay. Another question we've got is, how do you manage things like performance and memory optimization?
Good question. Okay, so for app performance, there is something in like Android Studio called I think it's called Profiler. So you can go on there and see like where memory usage is. There's also tools within Android Studio when you are doing network calls. So you can see how many network calls you're making, how much memory is used throughout the app, depending on like what you're testing, like if it's the whole app experience or if it's a particular feature. And for memory optimization, like those are all kind of tied together, where you can, like I said, you can use profiler, sorry, in Android Studio, and see like where improvements can be made versus like maybe you can make a less API calls or have something stored for at least a lesser amount of time.
Okay, another question. Are there any health tech trends or technologies that you're personally excited about?
Okay, so I know there's a lot of like AI ones coming about. Um, I'm not sure if I have like a particular one. I'm really into like the IoT, like the wearable ones, which seem pretty cool. Like I think there was one that someone was telling about the other day. I forget the name of the organization, but they go around and like make things for people that have disabilities. Like they went somewhere to a different country and made someone an arm, which I thought was really interesting. Um, if I find out what organization that was, I will like send it out. But those like there's companies out there that do like really great things like that that are I find very interesting.
Okay, so another question. So what determines your hydration baseline when building the intake tracker?
I think it has to do with I think they say that on average people should consume like 8 cups a day, or 8 glasses of water a day. If you want to make it more personalized, you when you are making the app, you could make that a part of the app that is inputted by the user and have them determine like, hey, I would like to target this instead of the baseline that I had there. So like say if someone's like, okay, I want to drink, I don't know, 12 glasses of water. They can go in and change that if they want to, but that's something you'd have to implement.
Okay, I've got one more question. That says, so for hydration goal calculation, so I think this is also related to the baseline sort of. This person wants to know what formula you should, like the best way to determine that. Is it going to be the weight of the user?
So for this workshop, it was just like the generic, like average,
Exactly.
yeah, 8 cups. But for like something that you are gonna like publish, it would be good to find or do a formula based on the user's weight and activity, and have them input like how active they are, how maybe how their height and then their weight, and then you can do like some calculation. I think you can probably look up a formula with that, but I don't know offhand a formula for that.
Okay. One last person from the audience. So, what are some of the ups and downs that you face when engineering an Android app?
I really feel like there's a lot of times you can look up or like have resources online. I think the hardest thing is like reading somebody else's code. Like especially like if it's like old code, and maybe the person, if you're at like a company and the person doesn't work there anymore and you're trying to like decipher like what they were trying to write. I mean, now it's probably easier with like the AI tools that people have access to, but I feel like that sometimes is like, okay, what were they trying to do here?
I think with AI, it's also like you're debugging something as well, because you know,
Yes. So I wouldn't like sometimes you'd go to AI and be like, okay, write this thing for me. And then it's like it takes so much time to debug. It's like, okay, it would have been better if I just wrote it myself. But
yeah,
it could be good to explain like a snippet of code. Like say if you had say like, oh, explain this to me, then it would be a good resource or tool to do that.
true. Okay, so do you recommend to have tests in the development of a tracker app, and what kind of tests?
Yes. So I think for the most part, I think you should always test your app, or write unit tests. For this, you can write unit tests for like different parts of where you can see things like breaking. So say if you are um like save the edit text or the part where you're getting user input from. Like say if someone puts in a value that you can't use, like a negative value or like letters, then you should be able to handle that and see like what can happen if testing if something goes wrong. So or like say for example you have an app, the tracker app, and you utilize or implement some like API calls, then you need to figure out, okay, what will happen if I don't get this data, the server's down or something like that. Like would you show
Mm,
um dummy data, or are you going to show a loading screen, an error screen? It just depends on what kind of user experience you want.
Last question for today. Can this work with MySQL? So I have a similar question. Is it better to use things like shared preferences or room database for data persistence?
I personally like Room. I use more Room on a day-to-day basis, I would say. I think that because I think for Room it might be a little if you like have database experience, then yeah, I would say I would recommend Room. But if you don't, it's kind of a lot to go through like migrations and tables and just figuring out all of that stuff. But I would say for like MySQL, I think that's more in the Room database realm. It's easier to like convert or, you know, use SQL in that sense.
Right then, we're going to end the questions here. Thank you everyone for tuning in. So Vanessa, we're really glad to have you today. Thank you for, going through this session with us. For everyone, we hope that this session has empowered you to use your skills as a prescription for better living, whether for yourself or for others. And we have another incredible workshop coming up next week, same time. It's the same theme. So it is the theme for the month, prescription for disruption, optimizing life with tech. Be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. All right then. So thank you everyone and good night.